Imagine, if you will, trying to predict the modern internet back in the 1970s. You're standing in a sterile, fluorescent-lit room looking at a computer the size of a refrigerator.
Yeah, and one that literally runs on paper punch cards.
Exactly. And from that vantage point, you have to somehow envision a future where, every single person on Earth is holding a sleek glass rectangle in their pocket that streams high-definition video from space.
And instantly translates languages, accesses the sum total of human knowledge, all of that. The difficulty there isn't just anticipating the miniaturization of the microchip.
Right.
The real challenge is that you have to project how human behavior, global economics, international infrastructure, how all of that will completely reinvent itself around a technology that barely even exists outside of government labs at the time.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling. Well, welcome to another deep dive.
What?
Today, we are asking you to take that exact same leap of imagination. But instead of computers, we are looking at solar panels.
It's a very similar trajectory, honestly.
It really is. Our mission today is to trace how solar energy went from a wildly expensive, fringe space-age novelty to what is rapidly becoming the absolute foundation of our future global civilization.
And we have a fantastic roadmap for this discussion today.
We do. We're pulling directly from a massive, comprehensive piece of research. Now, I'm going to read the full title once, just because it really sets the stage perfectly, even if it's a bit of a mouthful.
Go for it.
It is titled, Review of the Progressing Role of Solar Photovoltaics in Energy Transition Scenarios Over 5 Decades of 100% Renewable Energy Systems Research.
It's a remarkable piece of historical synthesis, truly.
Yeah, going forward, we'll just refer to it as this study to save some breath. But the hook here, the thing that makes this paper so fascinating to me is that it points out a massive, frankly shocking historical blind spot among the people who are supposedly in charge of predicting our energy future.
Right. We are talking about one of the most significant forecasting failures in modern economic history. Major, highly respected international institutions.
Like who, specifically?
Specifically, the International Energy Agency, the IEA, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. They historically failed, and I mean repeatedly failed, to accurately project the explosion of solar deployment.
Wait, how wrong were they?
Oh, their projections for solar growth were essentially flat lines, while the actual deployment curves out in the real world were going completely exponential.
That's crazy. So to understand how they got it so wrong, and how the broader scientific community finally got it right, the researchers behind this study analyzed 1,067 different scientific articles published all the way from 1975 to 2025.
Yeah, they dug through 50 years of data, and what they did was isolate 29 distinct milestones.
Like conceptual breakthroughs.
Exactly. Specific conceptual and mathematical breakthroughs that fundamentally changed how researchers view the potential of solar energy. And they conceptually map these milestones across 5 different categories, which is how we're going to structure our chat today.
Okay, lay out the framework for us.
So we'll look at the early visionary outlooks, then the evolution of economics, methodological advances in grid simulation, the incredible systems diversity of solar hardware, and finally others, which covers the broader systemic impacts on the global economy.
Love it. So let's start in that first category, the visionary outlook. Because before we get to the complex grid models of today, we have to start with the people who dared to dream when solar panels were, basically just extensive satellite parts.
We really do have to start in that early, almost science fiction era. The early milestones in the visionary research are fascinating because these scientists were operating in a total data vacuum.
I had nothing to go on.
Right. The study flags the very first article analyzing a 100% renewable energy system, which was published in 1975 by a researcher named Sørensen.
Okay, 1975, what did he predict?
Well, what stands out in that 1975 paper is the almost complete absence of solar photovoltaics. The focus was almost entirely on solar thermal heat.
Which makes sense contextually, right? In 1975, using the sun to heat a tank of water on your roof is a viable ancient technology.
Oh, absolutely.
But silicon solar cells back then, they were these bespoke, handcrafted components, primarily used to keep satellites running in orbit. They were prohibitively expensive for, normal terrestrial power generation.
They were astronomical in cost. But then, just 3 years later, in 1978, the study identifies a massive milestone. A researcher named Weingart published a paper proposing what he called the Helios strategy.
The Helios strategy. That
Yeah.
sounds like a Marvel movie plot.
It kind of does, but Weingart looked at those incredibly expensive satellite parts and proposed a vision predicting up to 100 terawatts of global solar installations, outlining a path to a completely globalized solar economy.
Okay, wait, let me pause on that number. 100 terawatts. Just to give you listening some perspective. Today, the entire world's electricity generating capacity from all sources, coal, gas, nuclear, hydro, everything is somewhere around 8 or 9 terawatts.
Mm.
So in 1978, Weingart is predicting a solar infrastructure more than 10 times the size of the entire modern global power grid.
It was incredibly prescient, and the visionary milestones, they just keep building from there. Fast forward to 1996, and Sorensen returns to the scene with a new model.
Okay, what's his update?
This time, incorporating the advancements of the previous 2 decades, he predicts that 77% of all global electricity generation could eventually come directly from solar.
Wow. I just want you, listening right now, to try to inhabit that mindset for a second. You are looking at a 1970s or 80s solar cell that costs an absolute fortune to produce a tiny trickle of electricity. And you have the audacity to publish a paper claiming it will one day power 3/4 of the human race.
It takes a lot of vision, definitely.
But, a vision remains purely theoretical until the underlying math actually supports it. I mean,
Wow.
a cool vision is just science fiction until someone can figure out how to pay for it.
Which is exactly how the models had to evolve next. The research community had to tackle the economics, which is our second category.
Right, show me the money.
The foundational milestone for this evolution is a concept called learning curves, which was first identified for solar way back in 1972 by a researcher named Wolf.
Okay, a learning curve. That essentially tracks how much the cost of a technology drops as manufacturing scales up, right?
Yes, often referred to as Wright's Law. This study highlights that solar has maintained an absolutely incredible 21% to 31% learning rate since its early space applications in the 1950s.
Wait, let's unpack the mechanism there. A learning curve isn't just saying things get cheaper over time. It's a specific mathematical formula. So what does a 21 to 31% learning rate actually mean?
It means every single time the cumulative global manufacturing capacity of solar panels doubles, the cost of producing them drops by about a quarter.
Oh, wow. Every time we double the total number ever made, the price drops 25-ish%.
Exactly. And that trend has held remarkably stable across decades of scaling.
So the price drop isn't tied to the passage of time at all. It's tied to the sheer volume of production. The more we build, the better we get at building them. The cheaper the supply chains get, the more efficient the silicon doping becomes.
Precisely. And as we move through the timeline mapped out in this study, you see a shift in the research. The early models simply simulated what a renewable grid might look like physically.
Right.
But as the learning curve relentlessly drove down costs, the milestones shift to cost optimizations. Researchers started asking supercomputers to find the absolute cheapest combination of energy sources to power a given region.
And when you feed that 21 to 31% learning rate into a supercomputer seeking the cheapest possible energy grid, what does it spit out?
A huge tipping point hits around 2018. Researchers, prominently Bogdam and his team, began publishing global studies proving something revolutionary.
Which what?
That transitioning to a 100% renewable energy system doesn't just match the cost of the existing fossil fuel infrastructure, it fundamentally undercuts it. It actually reduces overall systemic costs compared to maintaining the fossil fuel status quo.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here. If this learning curve, this mathematical guarantee that costs will plummet as capacity doubles, has been stable and documented since the 1970s, why did the smartest people in the room at the IEA and the IPCC keep getting their cost projections so horribly wrong?
That is the big question.
Yeah, I mean, how did major institutions miss a trend that had been operating for 50 years?
It is one of the most vital insights in this study. The institutions failed because they relied on static cost assumptions. They failed to account for what economists call endogenous technological learning.
Meaning they treated solar panels the same way they treated traditional energy sources.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're modeling a coal plant, the cost of coal next year is primarily tied to extraction difficulty and scarcity. It's a commodity.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just manufacture coal cheaper by building more coal plants.
That is the crucial distinction. Their models assumed the cost of solar in the future would drop at a slow, fixed, predetermined rate, regardless of how many panels were actually manufactured.
So they decoupled the price from the production volume.
Exactly. They don't build the learning curve into the algorithm's behavior. So the model would look at the current year and say, solar is currently expensive, so we shouldn't build much of it. And because the model assumed we wouldn't build much, it assumed the price wouldn't drop significantly.
Wow. So by treating a dynamic mass-manufactured technology like a static commodity, they coded a self-fulfilling prophecy of failure directly into their algorithms.
Yep.
It's like, I don't know, it's like predicting the cost of a flat-screen TV in 2024 by assuming we'd still be hand-wiring vacuum tubes in a garage, completely ignoring the economies of scale in modern fabrication plants.
That captures the error perfectly. But, once the broader research community corrected that economic blind spot, a new problem emerged.
Naturally. What was it?
Well, proving that solar is the cheapest option on an annualized spreadsheet is one thing. Convincing grid operators that an entire continent running on solar won't go completely dark the second the sun sets on a windless winter evening requires an entirely different level of mathematical rigor.
Right, because cheap energy is useless if it's not reliable. So how did these scientists bridge the gap between theoretical economic models and the physical reality of a power grid that has to balance supply and demand every single second of the day?
This brings us to the third category, methodological advances. The transition relies on the idea that better economics forced better modeling methodologies.
Okay, makes sense.
In the early days, you could publish a transition study using basic annual averages. But as solar became a larger projected share of the mix, the models had to get dramatically smarter to handle intermittency. According to this study, the watershed moment here was the 2010 HYDE study.
What did Hyde do differently?
This was the first time researchers introduced hourly resolution modeling for an area as large as all of Europe.
Oh, wow. Hourly resolution changes everything. They aren't just saying Europe needs X terawatt hours this year. They are calculating the exact supply and demand at 200 a.m. in late November when demand spikes for heating. But solar output across the continent is absolute zero.
Exactly. And from 2010 onwards, the methodological milestones just explode in complexity. The models evolve from looking at isolated countries to multi-node, interconnected global grids.
How complex did they get?
By 2018, researchers had developed models capable of optimizing 145 distinct, interconnected global regions simultaneously, all in hourly resolution.
Let me try an analogy here to ground just how complex that is. It feels like going from calculating your annual grocery budget by simply guessing, I spend $5,000 a year, to suddenly using a computer to track the exact calorie intake, metabolic burn rate, and meal timing of 145 different people every hour of the day for a year.
That's a great way to put it.
And while also factoring in supply chain disruptions at the supermarket.
Right, because it highlights the interconnected nature of the problem. If one of those 145 nodes experiences a localized weather event, say a massive cloud cover over Germany, the model has to instantly calculate the transmission physics and economics of importing surplus wind power from a node in the North Sea, or maybe dispatching battery storage locally to keep the grid balanced. It's an unfathomable amount of math. It is. And to ensure ultimate reliability, the study notes another major milestone around 2024. Researchers began running these 100% renewable simulations through up to 60 decades of historical weather data.
60 years of weather data. So they are actively stressing the grid models against historical anomaly events. Dark winters, multi-week wind droughts, extreme heat waves. They are proving mathematical resilience against the absolute worst the climate can throw at them.
They are. But this brings us to what I find to be the most incredible irony uncovered in this entire review.
Okay, what's the irony?
We have these hyper-advanced, 145-node, hourly resolved, weather-tested supercomputer models, and yet the scientists running them are still making one massive, highly reductive mistake about the physical solar panels themselves.
This leads to the fourth category. The blind spot regarding systems diversity. Despite mapping out the exact electrical load of the entire planet hour by hour, how are they fundamentally misrepresenting the actual hardware?
The findings regarding PV system diversity in the study are genuinely startling. After analyzing over 1,000 articles, the researchers found that a massive 77% of all 100% renewable energy studies treat solar power as a generic monolith.
Just a giant abstract bucket called solar.
Exactly. Only a tiny fraction, just 16% of the studies, bother to mathematically differentiate between a massive utility-scale solar farm out in the desert and the decentralized solar panels sitting on residential rooftops.
That seems like a massive oversight. Modeling the global energy system and not differentiating between utility solar and rooftop solar is like, I don't know, modeling the global transportation system and not differentiating between a freight train and a bicycle.
That's spot on.
I mean, yes, they are both vehicles, but they serve completely different logistical functions and utilize totally different infrastructure.
And it goes far beyond just roofs versus fields. This study reveals there are actually up to 8 distinct PV system applications that need to be actively modeled to get an accurate picture of the energy transition.
8? What are they?
Well, you have residential, commercial, and industrial rooftop PV. Then utility-scale PV, which breaks down into fixed tilt and single-axis tracking, plus monofacial and bifacial.
Okay.
Then there's vertical PV, agrivoltaics, floating offshore PV, and vehicle-integrated PV. For example, let's look at utility scale. The models almost universally assume fixed tilt panels bolted to racks that don't move. But the study highlights that today, more than 50% of all new utility installations use single-axis tracking systems.
Where algorithms slowly tilt the panels throughout the day to follow the sun from east to west.
Exactly. Tracking systems significantly flatten the solar generation curve. They produce way more power in the early morning and late afternoon compared to fixed panels. Yet less than 10% of the research studies actually include tracking in their models.
So the models are artificially limiting the daily generation window of the grid because they're ignoring the actual technology being deployed in the real world. That is wild. What are the other use cases they're ignoring?
The study heavily emphasizes emerging technologies that change the land use equation. A major one is agrivoltaics, mixing solar generation directly with active agricultural farming. The study notes a milestone 2023 paper out of Israel that modeled this beautifully.
Walk us through the mechanism of agrivoltaics, because intuitively people assume solar panels and crops compete for the same sunlight, like you either grow food or you grow power.
That is the old assumption. But agrivoltaics demonstrates a symbiotic loop. Many crops, particularly in hotter climates, actually suffer from heat stress and excessive evaporation under direct midday sun.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So if you elevate solar panels over the crops, the panels provide partial shade, which reduces water evaporation from the soil and protects the plants. In return, the natural process of plant transpiration, the crops releasing water vapor, actually cools the underside of the solar panels.
And silicon solar cells become more efficient and conductive when they operate at cooler temperatures. That is incredible.
It's a perfect feedback loop.
So the crops keep the panels cool, increasing electrical yield, while the panels protect the crops, increasing agricultural yield and saving water.
It fundamentally rewrites the land use calculation. The study also highlights floating offshore PV, which was first rigorously modeled for the Maldives in 2022.
Well, that makes sense for islands.
Exactly. If you are an island nation, land is your most precious resource. You can't cover it in solar farms. But if you can float the arrays on calm offshore waters or drinking water reservoirs, which again reduces evaporation, you suddenly have massive decentralized energy generation.
So why does this diversity matter to you, the listener? It matters because treating solar as a monolith dramatically underestimates the feasibility of the energy transition.
It really does.
If a global model only allows for giant fixed-tilt solar farms in arid regions, the model will eventually hit a wall and say, we are out of suitable desert, we must fall back on fossil fuels or nuclear. But if the model understands agrivoltaics, vertical panels on buildings, and floating solar, it realizes we can generate power locally practically anywhere.
Diversity turns solar from a bulky, centralized infrastructure problem into a flexible, highly localized solution.
Okay, so if we finally correct that blind spot, if we deploy all these diverse solar systems globally, at scale, on the roofs, over the crops, tracking the sun, floating on the reservoirs, what happens next? If we solve the economics, we solve the intermittency, and we maximize the deployment diversity, where does this 50-year evolution actually lead?
That brings us to the final analytical category in the study, which they broadly call others. This captures the complex, system-wide milestones.
The big picture stuff.
Right. They look at critical material limitations, asking if building this infrastructure will exhaust global supplies of lithium or cobalt. They analyze system-wide energy return on investment, ensuring it doesn't require more energy to mine and manufacture the new grid than the grid itself will produce over its lifespan.
Crucial planetary safety checks. I mean, we can't transition to a system that bankrupts the Earth's mineral reserves just to keep the lights on.
Very important checks, which the literature thankfully indicates are solvable. But the most profound revelation in this study, the true endgame, is what cheap, ubiquitous, diverse solar actually enables for human civilization.
Lay it on me.
Across the modern transition studies analyzed, solar PV is projected to provide an average of 61%, and in many recent models, increasingly 60 to 80% of the total primary energy supply globally around mid-century.
Let me stop you there to clarify a term for everyone. Total primary energy supply.
Mm.
That is a massive distinction. We are not just talking about the electrical grid that powers your laptop and your lights.
No, primary energy means all energy. The energy used for industrial process heating, for global maritime shipping, for aviation, for heavy manufacturing, everything.
Wow.
And that introduces the ultimate destination mapped out in this study. The transition into a power-to-X economy, which, given the dominance of photovoltaics, is rapidly being termed a solar-to-X economy.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of the X and solar to X, because we are moving past plugging things into sockets here. We're talking about using sunlight to manufacture the physical and chemical building blocks of the modern world. How does that actually work?
It's driven by the generation curve of solar power. In a deeply decarbonized grid dominated by solar, you are going to have massive, almost unfathomable surpluses of electricity during the middle of the day.
Because the sun is peaking.
Right. Terawatts of power available for just a few hours. You cannot possibly build enough batteries to store all of it. Instead of curtailing that power, which means turning the panels off, you use that incredibly cheap, practically free electricity to run massive industrial processes.
So you build chemical plants that only operate from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. when the power is virtually free.
Exactly. You route that daytime solar surge into electrolyzers to split water molecules and generate green hydrogen.
Wow.
You take that green hydrogen and synthesize green ammonia, which replaces the fossil fuel-derived fertilizers that currently feed half the planet. You combine that hydrogen with captured carbon to produce e-fuels, literally synthesizing liquid kerosene out of thin air and water to fuel long-haul jet airplanes.
That is just wild to think about.
It doesn't stop there. You power massive desalination plants to generate fresh water for arid regions. You even use it to run direct air capture machines, using excess sunlight to actively pull historical carbon pollution out of the atmosphere.
It sounds like modern alchemy. We are taking photons emitted by a star, capturing them on an agrivoltaic farm in Israel or a tracking array in Texas, and mathematically converting them into jet fuel, fertilizer, and fresh water.
It represents the ultimate paradigm shift in how humanity sustains itself. Energy transitions from being a scarce resource that you have to extract from deep underground and transport across oceans to a ubiquitous resource that you harvest from the sky and manufacture locally into whatever state liquid fuel, gas, or electricity your society needs.
Which brings our deep dive completely full circle. What started as a 1970s pipe dream, a wildly expensive novelty, where researchers like Sorensen and Reingart were basically guessing in the dark about satellite parts, has evolved over 50 years into the diverse, mathematically rigorous, cost-crushing backbone of our entire future.
The evolution from that first paper in 1975 to the 145-node, hourly resolved power-to-X global models of today is a profound testament to human ingenuity and the scientific method.
And that is exactly why this review of the progressing role of solar photovoltaics in energy transition scenarios over 5 decades of 100% renewable energy systems research is such a crucial roadmap. It systematically shows us where our models have been blind, how they corrected themselves, and exactly how bright the resulting future actually is.
As we wrap up, I'll leave you with a final thought to ponder that extends beyond the math of the models.
Okay, what is it?
If sunlight can be converted locally into the fuels, the fertilizers, and the chemicals that currently dictate global trade and frequently spark international conflicts, what happens to the entire concept of geographic wealth?
Oh, wow.
Right. When the ultimate currency of human progress energy can be harvested and synthesized anywhere the sun shines, does the geopolitical map of the world as we know it simply dissolve?
We started by comparing this transition to the impossibility of predicting the smartphone from a 1970s mainframe computer. But honestly, the smartphone just changed how humanity communicates this. This fundamentally changes what the human world is made of. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us today. We'll see you next time.